They said humans weren't supposed to survive the first semester. They survived 3 years, and I'm still not sure if that's a triumph or a curse. I remember the looks we got on the first day at the Interstellar Academy of Ascendancy. That's the fancy name they gave the place, though everyone just called it the pit. It wasn't built for our kind. It wasn't built for any species, really. The Academy was a crucible designed to melt away weakness, to expose which minds and bodies could be hammered into weapons worthy of the galactic conquered. When the transport doors opened and the human students stepped onto the landing platform, you could feel the change in the crowd of aliens already assembled. Hushed clicks from insectoids, folded wings from aven, hushed whispers from reptilian tongues. The idea of humans joining the Academy was absurd, too frail, too emotional, too dangerous. I hadn't spoken to a human before those days, though I had read plenty. Files called them latecomers to galactic life, a species from a so-called death world, teeming with predators, diseases, and unstable climates. Their resilience was theoretical to me, the way scholars spoke of myths and exaggerations. When I first saw them in person, hair of many shades, skin that didn't shine with scales or fur, eyes that seemed too soft, I thought the rumors had been wrong. They looked ordinary, yet something in the way they scanned the room told me they were taking in everything, not just who was present, but who stood tallest, who shifted nervously, who already smelled a fear. Orientation was meant to break us in gently. That's what the instructor said. But gently in the pit meant being dropped into simulated zero-gravity combat exercises while a dozen instructors barked orders. For most species, failure meant bruised pride. For humans, failure looked different. On the first drill, one of them, her name was Sarah, slammed into the bulkhead at a speed that should have fractured her spine. The entire cohort gasped. The medics rushed forward, and then, to everyone's disbelief, she groaned, spat a little blood, and shoved herself back into the fray before they could touch her. The instructors didn't stop her. They watched, almost curious. Later, when I asked why she had done it, she laughed. She said where she came from, falling and getting up again, wasn't a choice. It was survival. That was my first hint that humans measured pain differently. Most species at the Academy avoided unnecessary risk. Injury was seen as weakness. Failure is shame. Humans turned both into lessons. Every bruise, every scar, they wore them as stories. And that unsettled everyone. Because if someone can take punishment that would leave you crippled and still keep moving, how do you fight them? Food time revealed another oddity. The Academy supplied nutrient slurries tailored to every biology. Efficient, tasteless, nothing more than fuel. The humans tolerated it, but after a week they began trading favors for anything with texture. A dried fruit rind from a winged species, a scrap of smoked flesh from the reptilians. They would gather these scraps, mix them and share among themselves. They didn't just eat. They celebrated in a place designed to strip us of comfort. They created ritual, and in that ritual, they built unity. When you faced trials designed to fracture you into isolated fragments, that unity was terrifying. Then came the endurance march. A full day across the canyon terrain of Zar 4, heat shimmering, gravity heavier than standard. Many species collapsed under the weight of equipment. I nearly did too. But the humans didn't just carry their own packs. They carried each other. One stumbled. 2 others lifted him without hesitation. When water ran out, rationed silently, not waiting for orders. The instructors observed closely, making notes on tablets. I could see it on their faces. This wasn't normal. Students were supposed to compete to fight for rank. The humans bent the rules without breaking them, refusing to let one another fall behind. Their motto seemed to be, if one of us fails, we all fail. It was the opposite of how the Academy was built, and yet it worked. I confess I began watching them more than my own kind. I was drawn to their strangeness. Even in rest periods when most of us sat in silence nursing wounds, they told stories. They laughed. Sometimes they argued so fiercely, I thought they'd fracture apart. But the next day they fought side by side as if nothing had passed between them. They didn't suppress their emotions the way we were trained. They used them like fuel. Anger became strength. Fear became caution. Sorrow became loyalty. One night, I asked one of them, David, why they were like this. Why they never gave up on one another. He didn't answer with philosophy or some grand speech. He just said, because no one else will. Those words haunted me, because I realized he wasn't just speaking of humans in the academy, he was speaking of humanity everywhere. A species that had been told again and again they weren't enough, that no one believed in them, so they learned to believe in themselves. Of course, not everyone saw them with admiration. Whispers spread among the alien cohorts. Unstable, primitive, Dishan, too dangerous to trust. The instructors didn't silence these voices. I think they wanted to see what would happen. Would the humans snap? Would they lash out? Instead, they smiled in ways that unsettled even the boldest of us. A smile that wasn't joy, but something sharper. They knew they were being underestimated, and they let it happen because they knew underestimation was the best weapon of all. Looking back, I realized that first year wasn't about teaching humans. It was about studying them. The academy wanted to know what happened when you dropped Deathworlders into a crucible made to break everyone, and what happened was this. The crucible bent around. The second year was when everything at the academy turned darker. First year had been trials of endurance and survival. Challenges meant to push our bodies and test the edges of our patience. The second year was designed for something else entirely. Psychological frag. The instructors began shifting strategies. No longer content with exhaustion and injury, they wanted us to turn on one another. Trust exercises were twisted into betrayals. Team trials turned into contests where sabotage was rewarded. Students were ranked daily, with privileges granted to those who climbed over their peers. For most cohorts, it worked. Alliances crumbled. I watched reptilian cliques splinter. Avens refused to share intelligence. And even the insectoid collectives, normally so cohesive, fell into bitter division. But when the humans entered these games, the results defied every model the instructors had designed. The first trial was the capture drill. Groups of 4 were dropped into a simulated derelict station, tasked with seizing control of a central beacon, while evading patrols of armed drones. The rules encouraged betrayal. Only one could activate the beacon, and the reward was full immunity from training duties for a month. Among other species, this meant backstabbing within minutes. In one run, I observed an Avan cadet feign injury only to stab a teammate with a plasma spike and sprint for the beacon. It was bloody, efficient, and exactly what the instructors wanted. When the humans were tested, I braced myself for similar treachery, but they did something else. They took turns holding the beacon, not one victor, but all 4, hands pressed in sequence, refusing to choose a single champion. When the instructors stormed in demanding an explanation, Sarah said, "We don't leave people behind." The staff tried to invalidate the run, but the humans had already fulfilled the rules, just not in the way anyone had expected. They had broken the spirit without breaking the letter. That night, whispers spread across the dormitories. Aliens muttered that humans didn't fear punishment. Others claimed they couldn't understand competition. But I had seen their eyes sharp and cold in that moment of truth. They understood competition perfect. They just knew that unity gave them better odds than betrayal ever could. The second trial was worse. It was called the Descent, a psychological simulation where cadets were placed in isolation chambers and subjected to visions drawn from their deepest fear. For Avans, it meant endless skies collapsing. For reptilians, the loss of heat and light. For insectoids, the shattering of the hive link. Most emerged shaken, some unable to continue for days. The humans reacted differently. One screamed until her voice broke. But when she staggered out of the chamber, she laughed. She said it reminded her of storms back home. Another punched the walls until his fist bled, as though he could fight the vision itself. None of them broke. When asked what they had seen, they gave different answers. But there was a common thread. They didn't speak of personal fears alone. They spoke of others' friends dying, families lost. The group torn apart. It wasn't the void or the monsters that haunted them. It was the thought of being left alone. By then, even the instructors stopped hiding their unease. These drills were meant to isolate, to peel away loyalty, until only self-interest remained. But the humans used their very nightmares as fuel to cling tighter to one another. What should have broken them instead welded them together. I will never forget the day of the war game. It was a full-scale simulation across the Academy's training grounds. Dozens of cadets per side. Objectives scattered across forests, swamps, and ruined cityscapes. The instructors seated spies within the teams, encouraging sabotage. I was unlucky enough to be placed on the same side as 3 humans. I expected to be discarded early, as most non-humans were in their groups. Instead, they drew me in. They asked what I could do, what my strengths were, and then they put me in a role where those strengths mattered. It was disarming. For once, I wasn't fighting to justify my existence. I was part of something larger, and we won. Not because the humans were the strongest or fastest, but because they orchestrated us like a unit. They turned a chaotic swarm of species into something coherent. I remember watching one of them crawl through mud to drag a winged cadet to safety, even though it cost him the flag we were supposed to seize. When questioned later, he only shrugged and said, "Flags can be retaken. People can't." By the end of that year, the reputation of the humans had shifted from fragile curiosities to something more unsettling. They were not the best fighters. The reptilians held that crown. They were not the best strategists. The Avans prided themselves on that. But they had something the rest of us didn't. They adapted faster than anyone else. One week they were clumsy with alien tech. The next they were making modifications to it. One day they flinched at psychic pressure. The next they used humor to blunt its edge. They treated every challenge as an experiment, every failure as data. And slowly the rest of us realized that if humanity stayed long enough in the pit, the Academy wouldn't shape them. They would reshape the Academy. By then I had begun keeping notes, documenting their behavior in secret, not because I feared them, though I did, but because I needed to understand what kind of species takes a system designed to fracture minds and instead uses it to forge bonds. What kind of people learn more from scars than from victory? The truth, I came to understand, unsettled me more than any simulation chamber ever could. Humans did not see the Academy as torment. They saw it as familiar. The third year was when whispers turned into fear. Until then, most cadets could dismiss human resilience as luck or novelty, or the result of instructors giving them leniency. But by the third cycle, no one could deny the truth. The humans were thriving where others faltered. Their numbers weren't large, barely 24 out of hundreds, but their presence reshaped every contest, every drill, every simulation. And for the first time in the Academy's history, other species began adjusting their strategies not around reptilians or Avans, but around humans. That terrified the faculty, more than it terrified the cadets. The year began with the infamous siege test. It was meant to simulate an overwhelming assault on a fortified position, with cadets assigned as defenders or attackers. The defenders usually collapsed within hours. Supplies were scarce, fatigue mounted, and most students broke long before the scenario ended. When the humans were placed on defense, things changed. They rationed their food differently, rotating shifts with a precision that surprised even the Avans. They built crude traps out of training debris, forcing the attackers to crawl through hazards the simulation had not accounted for. But the strangest thing was the sound. Human voices raised in songs. Not war chants, not martial cries, but simple rhythmic tunes that kept their spirits from cracking. The attackers hesitated. Some even admitted later that the sound unsettled them more than the defense. It wasn't the strength of the barricades that broke the siege. It was the humans' refusal to surrender their spirit. The instructors responded by escalating. If unity was their weapon, then the staff would target it directly. One drill scattered the humans across separate squads, assigning them to alien units to dilute their influence. But instead of diminishing them, the opposite happened. In every unit where a human was embedded, morale improved. Disputes were settled faster. Panic turned to planning, and small victories stacked up. I was in one such squad. At first, I resented the human assigned to us, a young man named Elias. I expected arrogance or pity. Instead, he asked me questions no one else had. What terrain suited me, what environment drained me, how I preferred to fight. He listened, then adapted the squad's approach around our strengths. When we completed the drill, the instructors accused us of collusion, but I knew the truth. Elias had simply seen what we were too blind to notice. The turning point came during the infamous night trial. It was a week-long ordeal across the volcanic fields of Threx. With shifting terrain, acid rains, and predators released from containment pens, survival was rare, even for elite cadets. I watched entire teams vanish into the smoke, their signals cut off, presumed lost. The humans endured, not because they were stronger, but because they moved like threads in a web, always checking, always pulling one another back from the brink. One night, a tremor split the ground beneath us, and I nearly fell into a river of molten rock. It was a human hand that seized mine. Sarah's, the same woman I had seen slam into a bulkhead years earlier. She pulled me up with a grunt and muttered, "We don't waste people." It wasn't kindness. It was principle. To them, saving me wasn't charity. It was strategy. By the end of the night trial, nearly half the cadets had withdrawn. The humans lost none. That statistic spread through the academy like wildfire. Suddenly, every alien student looked at them differently. Some with awe, others with dread. Rumors swirled that the instructors had miscalculated, that the humans were learning faster than intended, that their so-called fragility was an act. A quiet paranoia began to creep through the ranks. Some cadets avoided humans entirely, fearing they would be outshone. Others tried to befriend them, hoping proximity might grant them survival. The academy, designed to pit us against one another, had inadvertently turned humans into the axis around which everything spun. But the most terrifying truth revealed itself not in the trials but in the aftermath. During recovery hours, when most species nursed wounds in silence, the humans kept training. They sparred, exchanged knowledge, tested theory. I once saw two of them arguing over how best to reinforce armor with scraps of plating. Their solution was crude, even ugly, but it worked better than the issued design. When the instructors confiscated their modifications, the humans didn't protest. They simply began planning the next improvement. Failure was never final to them. It was raw material for their next attempt. By then, I was no longer an observer. I had become entangled in their orbit, pulled in by the strange gravity they carried. They made me stronger, sharper, more resilient than I had ever imagined I could be. And yet, I could not shake the unease that settled in my chest, because I understood now what the faculty feared. If humans could reshape individuals like me, what would happen if they reshaped the academy itself? What would happen if they reshaped the galaxy? The final year was never meant for survival. The academy named it the Ascension Cycle. Every cadet knew its real purpose. Not training, not drills, but the breaking of those who had somehow endured 3 years of torment. It wasn't preparation, it was exposure, stripping away every layer until nothing remained but raw truth. No ranks, no scores, no guidance, just endless simulations with no rules, no warnings, and no end. The instructors disappeared from view, leaving only drones to watch and the chilling reminder that every action would be judged. Most of us entered that year already half-shattered. Some still bore wounds from the night trial, from the descent, from every moment we had been told our limits, then shoved far past them. But the humans were different. They carried scars too, limps and bruises just like the rest of us. But they wore those marks like banners. Where others saw torment, they saw proof. Where others braced for destruction, they saw opportunity. The first ordeal was the silence. Squads were locked in pitch-black chambers, cut off from sound, from light, fed rations so thin they bordered on starvation. The lesson was simple. Isolation drives the mind to madness. I lasted 2 days before muttering aloud, desperate for a voice besides my own. When they opened the doors, I expected to see the humans broken. Instead, I found them huddled in circles, tapping rhythms on the ground, inventing codes to speak through walls, creating sound from nothing. While the rest of us collapsed inward, they reached outward. They refused silence, refused solitude, refused to learn the lesson the academy demanded. The next trial was the divide. Every squad was told a traitor lurked among them, a plant meant to sabotage the mission. It was a lie, of course. Sometimes there was no traitor at all, sometimes two. The design was simple, paranoia, until squads tore each other apart. My group turned on itself, accusations giving way to fists. But the humans, they chose a different path. When ordered to expose the traitor, they all stepped forward together, claiming guilt as one. The instructors seethed, but they couldn't punish them all without exposing their deception. Once again, the humans broke the rules by twisting them into something unanswerable. The final test was the collapse. The academy simulated a planetary catastrophe, cities crumbling under quakes, floods devouring settlements, communications failing everywhere. Cadets were ordered to save what they could: supplies, equipment, data. Civilians were illusions, distractions we were told to ignore. Most species treated them that way. The humans did. They carried holographic children from fire, shielded artificial elders from falling debris, dragged fabricated survivors from rising waters. It was absurd. None of it was real. And yet when the simulation ended, their score outstripped every other cohort. Because in saving what didn't matter, they uncovered new routes, secured overlooked caches, and inspired cadets on the verge of quitting. Their compassion had become their strategy, and it worked. That was when I finally understood. The academy was built on the belief that strength came from dominance, that survival meant selfishness, that bonds only made you weak. But the humans had proven the opposite. Their power was unity. Their weapon was refusal. Refusal to let go. Refusal to abandon. They weren't blind to cruelty. They simply defied it. Where others found torment, they found family. Where others found despair, they invented reasons to keep walking. Graduation was subdued. Few spoke. Many avoided even looking at the humans. The instructors handed out tokens of survival with hands that trembled. Out of hundreds, only a fraction stood on that stage. And among that fraction, nearly every human remained. It wasn't supposed to happen. After the ceremony, I sought out Sarah, the woman who once slammed into a bulkhead and rose smiling. I asked if she understood what it meant, that humans had turned the pit inside out. She studied me for a long time, then gave her answer. "We didn't come here to prove we are the strongest," she said. "We came here to prove we belong, and belonging means carrying each other, no matter what this place thinks." I left the academy scarred, yes, but I also left with knowledge. The terrifying truth about humans wasn't that they were unkillable. It wasn't that they were unbreakable. It wasn't that they were unbreakable. It was that they were contagious. Their way of thinking spread to anyone who stood beside them. They changed the rules, not through force but through loyalty. And in a galaxy built on suspicion and rivalry, that was more dangerous than any weapon. That is the story I carry. The truth I cannot release. The humans didn't just survive the pit. They reshaped it. And maybe in time, they'll reshape us all.